Habitat 2 campaign back in 2004. And when we really reinvigorated the campaign, beginning back in 2010, 2010, based on some funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, we started doing some post-event surveys. And through our surveys, we were able to survey a number of different folks. And what's shown here in the survey is the results in terms of a comparison of public awareness before and after exposure at 8 different events. The blue bars represent awareness before the event, and the red bars represent awareness after the event. And based on just the awareness, it increased from 71% to 90%, which was a 19% increase. Does this translate into behavior change? We think that it does. And here's why. It was a little bit tricky. So the technology is a little tricky today. So I think I skipped over something here. Let's go back. Boom, there we go. So this was the behavior based on a second set of questions. We asked what was and what will be your behavior before and after exposure to these events. Again, the blue bars represent before and the red bars after, and there was a 45% increase in terms of folks saying that they're willing to take action. So it went up to 89%. And so these results suggest that education can go a long way to prevent potential harmful pests and plants from spreading into our lakes and rivers, but we know that education is not sufficient. And why is that? Whoop, I'm getting ahead of myself again. There we go. Huh. Well, now it's going the wrong direction. Huh. I need to previous and previous. I got way going ahead of myself on this one. And there we go. So these are all examples of potentially harmful non-native species that have been likely released from water gardens and aquariums. And so what's featured here is the western mosquito fish. There's European frogbit, water lettuce, water hyacinth, purple loosestrife, shovel-nosed catfish on the left middle, hydrilla, flowering rush, goldfish, Brazilian elodea, koi, yellow iris, and golden clams, also known as corbicula. Corbicula is one of the most damaging macrofouling clams in the world, even beyond that of zebra mussels. Well, now it's just working beautifully. So the top 3 that are shown here are known, are native to South America, and they're likely to become established in Minnesota, but releases in the wild can still be harmful to the environment through the introductions of diseases or impacts of the native fish for as long as those individuals remain alive. Plus, its releases are really cruel to the animals because they're just not acclimated to our cold winter climates here. Releases into Minnesota waters do include things like red swamp crayfish from classrooms and live seafood pathways, as well as faucet snails, which is an intermediate host that kills waterfowl when they are consumed. And some populations of goldfish have been found in Minnesota waters. I understand that there's a couple of those down in the Twin Cities area. There's at least one in Powderhorn Park and another one down in Richfield at a nature preserve. We found goldfish in the rock pond here at the University of Minnesota Duluth back in 2004. This is a picture of some of the goldfish that I helped to net. And the issue here is not only are the goldfish bad when they're released into ponds like that because they make the water more murky and they cause problems with water quality, but they can also have diseases that can be spread by goldfish released, such as spring viremia of carp. And if we don't have enough viruses in our lives right now, there's also the herpes virus, which is found in at least 8 lakes in Minnesota and has been linked to koi and goldfish releases. And koi herpes virus resulted in at least 2 carp die-offs in Minnesota, in Lake Eliason in 2017 and Echo Lake in 2018. And as our climate changes, other species in our waters can become more established for maybe more susceptible to introductions. Just to note, the northern snakehead that's shown there at the top is such a threat to the United States waters that it was banned for importation in the United States and also for interstate transport since 2002. So others to be on the lookout is Brazilian Elodia or Brazilian waterweed that was found in Powderhorn Park back in around 2005, but DNR eradicated it. And also hydrilla, which is one of the most damaging invasive plants in the world. And it was recently eradicated from a lake in Indiana, but it cost about $8 million and cost about 10 years. And we've also found releases of alligators and snakes. I kind of got a weird hobby. I've been trying to track where these things have been popping up in the media. The first occurrence that I heard about was in 2005 in the Snake River down by Pine City. And there was a 6-foot alligator that was found then. Now, who has these alligators and how they're feeding them and keeping them and housing them, I have no idea. But there's been all sorts of releases that have occurred. There was an alligator that was shot in Scandia in 2013. There was an alligator found in Pillager and also Hardy Lake in 2016, and another alligator in Rochester. There was a couple also found, I believe, in Lake Phelan a couple of years ago on St. Paul. So this is sort of the tip of the iceberg and suggests that education alone isn't enough, that a new approach is needed to help prevent the releases of these animals, of reptiles, fish, and aquatic plants. So we know people want to do the right thing, and releases that we've recognized this afternoon are an indication that we just don't have the right tools and the capacity in place to take appropriate action. So we need alternatives. We need to develop tools capacity for taking action. So in response, Minnesota Sea Grant led a 3-year project on behalf of the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network based on funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And through that work, we established a Habitattitude Surrender collaboratives that hosted rehoming events to provide alternatives to prevent the spread of plants and pets from aquarius and water gardeners. We also hosted a symposium to advance the understanding of aquatic invasive species pathways, and a curriculum was also developed for grades 6 through 12, along with teacher day camps, and we conducted a lot of outreach across the region, carrying that prevention message. So we're just going to talk about the first item today. There we go. So we created these multi-organizational collaboratives called Habitattitude Surrender Collaboratives in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, Indiana. They got dozens of organizations involved, including retailers, humane societies, water garden societies, aquarium clubs, environmental learning centers, and zoos and aquariums. What resulted from this was the building of capacity in providing events for consumers to bring in and rehome their unwanted pets and plants. But before we did that, before we went out and tried to get some funding to provide some support for the project, we reached out to the Minnesota Aquarium Society in 2015. And the reason why we did that is we wanted to learn from them, basically determine if they thought this whole concept of rehoming might work. So we gathered some perceptions through a needs assessment questionnaire. And just touching on that very briefly, we were delighted to find out that it had overwhelming support. 88% said that it would be valuable. 72% felt it would help protect the MAS interests. 92% felt that surrenders were suitable alternatives to release. And importantly, 72% felt that it would prevent releases. So the results here really suggested the formation of Habitattitude network collaboratives could work. So Minnesota Sea Grant reached out and partnered with the Minnesota Aquarium Society after we secured some funding, and to hold events where pet owners could surrender unwanted pets and animals where they could be rehomed. And the first surrender event that we had was in January of 2016 during Minnesota Aquarium Society's winter auction, where over 100 fish were surrendered and rehomed. And the event really generated a lot of media coverage, doubled the attendance at the auction, and resulted in other organizations also asking for surrender events. So apparently aquarium dumping is pretty common in urban parks. So here are some of our other events. From 2016 to present, there's been over 1,300 animals that have been brought in. There were 35 snakes, turtles, and other reptiles. There were 40 dozen crayfish that were collected from 2 school districts in and around Duluth. 12 marine animals were surrendered at 15 events in Duluth and in the Twin Cities. I don't believe that any animals were returned during the Minnesota Water Guard Society parade of ponds during July of 2016. But we do know that the program did generate a lot of excitement and attracted many new communities in Minnesota and wanting to participate. And so here's our crew from our first Habitattitude surrender in Duluth in fall of 2016. We had many happy people, pet owners, and pets at that event. So we partnered with Animal Allies, our humane society here in the area, and also World of Fish, and also another organization to take in reptiles. And the picture in the upper right, just want to emphasize, is that Animal Allies has a Youth Allies program where they provide training to youth volunteers. And so we took advantage of that on that Saturday afternoon to train about 25 youth about invasive species, which was very welcomed. So regionally, there's been 5 collaboratives that were formed in Duluth, Twin Cities, Green Bay, and Coquina over in Wisconsin. The events were marketed through flyers, posters, and newspapers, newspaper ads. Those ads serve as models for use elsewhere, and through social media, mainly through Facebook posts and also Twitter, resulting in hundreds of people being educated and over 1,300 animals and plants rehomed and not released into the environment. So who are our partners? Well, they really vary by location, from hobby clubs and societies to businesses and nonprofits, including school districts. Let you take a look at that for just a second. What are we able to rehome? Well, again, it really depends upon the location of the partnership. It's mainly about the partnership's expertise, their capacity and facilities, and the location. And this is why the collaboratives widely vary and are not a one-size-fits-all. So there's some great pics here of kids getting involved in the action at the events. So the Habitattitude Collaborative Network has created a number of different tools for the toolbox that could be adapted or adopted for use by existing as well as new collaboratives. So those include some floor displays, lawn banners, table banners, fact sheets, ID cards, tip cards, and a variety of other different materials, event posters and flyers, a guide on how to staff a booth, which is very, very important, and to be able to deliver the message effectively out to passerbys and educate folks there. Print and electronic advertisements, also surrender and adoption forms, which is a key element here, because what we want is when the people are signing these animals over, know that they are surrendering them, and there will be no longer any kind of tie to those animals. But also provides us some documentation of it and why they're turning these things in, so it helps to make our outreach even better. Again, we have that needs assessment, which serves as a cornerstone to our collaborative efforts. And there's also a new website, habitattitude.net, that was launched by the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council last year. So in summary, based on the Habitattitude collaboratives, there were 3.6 million exposures that were generated. We brought in 31 new and existing partners. There were 15 surrenders that were held across the region. That's just for Minnesota. There were 83 talks across the region and 64 booths that educated over 61,000 people. That's again across the Great Lakes region. There were 3.5 million exposures that were generated by mass and social media. There were 22 trainings that educated over 270 teachers, and events educated over 15,000 students. And again, we developed the Habitattitude curriculum that was produced. So overall, there were 9.1 million exposures that were generated by the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network and our partners based on this collaborative network. So last, I'd just like to again extend an invitation to expand in some way our Habitattitude collaborative networks in partnership with the Minnesota Water Guardian Society. Again, the Habitattitude website was rolled out in spring of 2019. So we're inviting our previous partners to re-sign up. Unfortunately, the platform for both of the sites were not compatible, and the contact information that was in the previous site was lost. So we had around 300 partners at the time, and now that those partners are lost, we're asking basically folks, the leadership from those organizations, to go back there and submit their information. It's free, there's no obligations, but it gives you access to the campaign brand and also materials that have already been developed for distribution out to consumers. So we want to take this opportunity to reach out to you to create or join a new collaborative in the Twin Cities area if you're interested. I invite you to host displays and distribute materials like the Parade of Ponds or Northern Green, which is held each January at the Minneapolis Convention Center, or other events, or help advertise through your networks. And finally, to promote the use of the Adapt Habitattitude curriculum in your area schools. So with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions, Steve.
Okay, let me pull up my chat window here. Um, we did have one. Somebody mentioned there was a water monitor lizard pet that was lost in Chaska a few weeks ago.
Oh
We
my,
have several members have asked us, posted to me that we need to get involved, which we will do that. Um, so questions, we need to, anybody have a question for Mr. Jensen?
that's unfortunate that monitor lizard has escaped, but there's a monitor established population down in Florida, south of it's north of the Everglades and south of um, Captiva Island.
I know I had one question. I know the water hyacinth and the water lettuce, I know they list them as an invasive species, which they are, but with our winters, I mean, I've tried to overwinter like water lettuce in my inside aquarium, so to repopulate my pond in the spring. I can't even
Mm-hmm.
keep it alive in an aquarium that's at 80 degrees. Um,
Really?
how would they? I guess with the Minnesota winter, how killing water lettuce and hyacinth off?
Right.
Why is it such a um, bad species? I mean, I know it's invasive.
Yep.
It grows like wildfire because I usually end up having to empty my pond around, 1st of August.
Sure. Those two species and also parrot feather are three species that has been up on our radar screen for quite some time. So there's, if we sort of talk about them as case studies, there was a situation years ago where water lettuce was found in Lake Winona, and it was found in one location, and then it died off during the wintertime, and so there wasn't a whole lot of concern about because it's floating up on the top, that it just wasn't able to survive. But there's now been a couple of other occurrences in Minnesota, including down in the Mississippi River, where water lettuce, water hyacinth, and also parrot feather were found, many acres of it, and it's been physically removed. Unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, have not been found. We've had water hyacinth that was found in Loch Laparle, I'm going to guess 10 years ago or so, and that population was also eradicated. And just this last year, water hyacinth was found near Green Bay. And those
Okay.
are the results of successful overwintering. So
Wow.
it's very much a concern that these species, some way, somehow, are either one, adapting, or because of climate change and our lessening of our harsh winters is allowing some of these species, if they're introduced, to become established.
Okay. We do have a couple questions. What are the newest invasive species in Minnesota that you are following? You mentioned the parrot feather, and we also have the water
Sure.
hyacinth. Are there
Yep.
others?
There are some species in Minnesota that we're tracking, and probably you've heard about the one that's kind of the big elephant in the room, and that's starry stonewort, which is a macroalgae. And so, in comparison to vascular plants, which has plants that transport water and nutrients up and down the stems and to the leaves and so on, this macroalgae, actually each stem and each part of the stem, each leaf is an individual cell. And because of that, traditional herbicides aren't effective on it. It basically just gives it a haircut where it comes in contact with it when the herbicide is applied at the surface. So there's some research going on at the University of Minnesota, at the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, to try to develop unique approaches, some novel approaches to be able to control and manage starry stonewort.
Okay. Uh, Another question. What is the best resource to learn more about the life cycle? Assuming they're referring to the invasive species.
Well, each one has a fairly unique life cycle. I mean, some of the plants form seeds and spread by seeds, and so we'd be concerned about that if they potentially could spread into the environment. Others like curly pondweed, for example, which probably isn't used too much in the water garden trade, but that they do form turions. Hydrilla does form turions as well. And those are vegetative propagules that basically fall to the bottom of the lake or river where they inhabit, and then they resprout in February, and then they begin to grow, and that gives a competitive advantage over our native plants, which generally start coming up as the light begins to penetrate more into March and April as the ice cover reduces. In terms of the fish, they basically all, of course, mate and produce offspring. But when it comes to invertebrates, then the life cycles for many of those species are very, very different. Some produce asexually, some produce resting eggs, like the spiny water flea, which actually forms two different types of eggs. In the fall, it produces an amphibia egg that sinks to the bottom, and then in June, that amphibia egg then hatches into a female. The female produces more clones, and then in the fall they go into asexual reproduction, and then the population dies out, and because they're producing the amphibia eggs, and the cycle goes on. So the life cycle amongst all these different species are sometimes quite novel, and that gives them a competitive advantage.
Okay. So is there a specific place where we could go to learn about the life cycles? I mean, is there like
Yes.
the habitude .net location,
There's
or is it?
not too much there about the life cycle, but there's lots of information on the Minnesota Sea Grant website about some of these species, and also Minnesota DNR. And then I also mentioned already the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center.
Okay. Um, what is the best way to treat water plants for invertebrates prior to planting in our ponds?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So Sue Galadowitz and Christy Mackey back in 2004 or 5 conducted a study at my suggestion. They received some federal funding to do it, and Sea Grant funded the project. And that was to take a look at a blind sampling of orders of retail plants. And what they were specifically looking for were hitchhikers. And 93% of the plants that they purchased had aquatic hitchhikers along with them, and that included other aquatic plants. Part of the problem was the plants were misnamed, and there were also aquatic invertebrates, and there were even fish eggs and a spider in there. And so the best way to try to minimize that risk of hitchhiking is make sure that you're inspecting your plant orders, and you're inspecting them to find if indeed they are the plants that you ordered, and you're not bringing something illegal into the state, and to dispose of those properly by throwing those in a sealed plastic bag in the trash. But then any other animals that you might see that are on there, also euthanize those properly.
Sorry, I muted myself. I thought I was having feedback. Question: what is a acceptable pond plant for fast coverage of a pond that is not dangerously invasive?
Ooh, that's a good one too. Minnesota Sea Grant has a poster that may be helpful, and on that poster we identify species that are of concern in the region, and then less weedy lookalikes. I'd have to pull up that poster to see what we suggested in there on there for say something that might be comparable to something like water lettuce, I guess.
Okay. Um, is that on the habitude.net site?
It'd be on the Minnesota Sea Grant website.
Sea Grant. Okay.
Yeah.
I can
Yep.
get a hold of that, and
Sure.
hopefully we'd be able to reprint it, and then I could pass it out to our members if they're interested.
Yep, we do have copies in our office, but unfortunately, there's nobody there to distribute them out. So.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your time, Doug. Very informative to our members, and I think as a garden society, we're gonna have to look at rejoining the Habitude program, and I know I signed us up to be kind of a partner with a Sea Grant. So
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
I think we
Oh, that
should
would be awesome.
need to partner alongside. I know a lot of our members are very conscientious about making sure that they dispose of all any of their plants, properly. So
Hmm. That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's it's been a great partnership with the Minnesota Aquarium Society, and I'm sure it's the same with your organization. Though I don't know your organization as quite as well, but one of the things that really has bonded the communities together is this whole conservation ethic, and I think that is a sort of a platform in which the Habitat 2 campaign has been created, and that is it's all about education and getting that platform out there, but also recognizing that um, if events are held, that'll also help protect our environment from the impacts of these harmful species, because we need healthy lakes and rivers in Minnesota, maybe maybe now more than anything, because of those communities that are out there depend upon healthy lakes and rivers for jobs and for tourism and so on. So really important to the state of Minnesota in particular.
well, I do know one of our members just mentioned to me to mention our koi adoption program. um,
Mm.
we have one of our members has set up a fish store. I don't know what, not a
Mhm.
store, but basically anybody in our society who no longer wants their fish, or
Mhm.
has excess fish, we donate them to our garden club, and then from there he keeps them and grows them, and then you know when people need more fish, if they lose
Mhm.
them from winter kill, that's how we
Sure.
maintain our fish population, so we're not releasing them back into the lakes.
Right. Yep. And we've had a fair number of koi and goldfish. Goldfish are by far the number one. Well, maybe number two. We've had lots of mollies also brought in at the Minnesota Aquarium Society's um, winter and spring auctions. But when we've had some good sized koi come in as well, like good 3 pounds.
Oof. Let's
One
see, I
guy,
have some other questions here. What were you
sure.
going to say, Doug? Go ahead, I'll let you
Well, I was
finish
going to say
first.
one fellow that brought in his koi. He brought in two of them. One was kind of whitish, and the other one was blackish. And he had moved originally from Florida to Minnesota. And when they built their house, um, they built a large aquarium in the middle of their living room, and they had these koi in there with some other fish, I believe. But then his wife, who was taking care of it, came down ill, and so she could no longer take care of it, and he was unable to do it as well. And so he brought those fish in to be rehomed. So he was happy that the surrender event was happening, so that they could, get these fish adopted, and they were adopted on the spot.
Well, yeah. Well, I have two American koi that they're going to live their lives in my pond, but um, Bonnie is about 30 inches long and about 8 inches wide, and
Mm.
Clyde is maybe about 25 inches long. Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde. Yes, I know. That's what happens
Uh-huh.
when you let your grandchildren name your fish. Um, but Clyde is about 25 inches long, and he's maybe a good 6, 7 inches wide. So,
Hmm.
a couple more
Well, we
questions
have
here.
Peter. We have Peter and Tinker here, two of our cats. So
What is the effectiveness of using potassium, oh, Jan, pergranate to remove hitchhikers?
potassium permanganate.
That's it. Thank you.
Yes, potassium permanganate. Well, that was one of the first tools that was identified by industry to treat water systems, to treat for zebra mussel control. And
Okay.
so, at high enough concentrations, potassium permanganate is a biocide and also a disinfectant.
Okay, because I know
So I
we
would
have
imagine.
when we buy our watered lettuce and hyacinths from the growers, when we bring them in here, we dip them in that potassium permanganate to
Permanganate.
to kill any of the hitchhikers. I'm assuming that's a the way to do it.
I hadn't heard of that before.
Okay.
Does
Um,
What concentration of potassium permanganate?
Okay, I am waiting for her to type that.
Be very interested in that.
Okay. Jan, he would like to know the concentrate that we use.
Oop, there's the chat room.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So
There you go, Jan.
yeah, it's a pretty high concentration. We don't usually measure it, but it's we usually use 5-gallon buckets, and there's almost like a quarter cup in there, so it's it's super dark purple. And I know anytime I've done it, like if there's leeches in there or something like that, you see them like scurrying out and dying really fast. So we dip them in a super strong concentrate, and and that's probably like 30 seconds, and then we do a rinse, and then put them in a storage that after so the super high concentrate, and then there's like a rinse dip, and then it goes into a storage tank, and the residual concentration in the storage tank still shows some purple in it. So
Okay.
so we kind of blast them in the very beginning, and then they sit a little bit longer, a couple of days in a lower concentration. But that's mostly because I don't know it at some length of time, and it starts having, I think, a negative effect on the plant life themselves.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, that's good
But
to know.
I didn't know if there's an industry standard for concentration and length of time for doing that kind of thing, which is where my question came from.
Wow, that's tremendous information. I'd never heard that before. So you said it's a half a cup of potassium permanganate in 5 gallons of water?
Oh no, not quite. Yeah, maybe a quarter cup.
Quarter cup in 5 gallons?
Yeah, it's very high. Yeah, if you look at what water treatment plants use, it's like a teaspoon for 5 gallons. So the fact that we're really blasting it at the very beginning, that was just to try to do something to know that we could do it in like a quick kill. But I don't have scientific evidence to know, like I said, concentration and time, what kills what.
Right.
So but it seems to be pretty effective in terms of feedback from people who have bought our plants after we've done the dip. We call it a dip. That they don't seem to have problems with like snails and leeches, which is probably our top 2 hitchhikers from the plants we buy.
Sure. And may I ask who you're with?
What do you mean?
Well, you said you're selling these plants?
Yeah, we have a plant sale.
I see.
Once a year with the Minnesota Water Garden Society.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the Minnesota Water Garden Society holds a plant sale once a year, and it's a fundraiser for us to
Sure.
To all of our members. We bring in different plants, but we do bring in water lettuce and the water hyacinth. Like Jan said, we dip them in that.
Yeah, and Doug,
stuff.
we do get inspected by the Department of Agriculture, and they've never found a problem with our plants that we've been selling. But they've also not been able to give us advice on what we need to do to really kill some of those before we sell.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's a tough one for them to be able to identify, because all the plants are going to be very different in terms, and the animals that you're trying to control all have different responses to the toxicity of the chemical. I don't think there's been research done on that, so I'll have to investigate this further.
Okay. Maybe we can partner with you, and we can provide our information to you as to what we've done, and
yes,
hopefully we can figure out if what we're doing is working or not. So I know I've bought the water lettuce and hyacinth, and I've never had a problem in my pond as far as any other. My pond runs year round. I never shut my pond down, and I have a fairly decent filtering system, and my pond is 35 inches deep, and I can count the rocks on the bottom in the dead of July and August and September. So I never have an algae problem, and I've never seen any other snails or anything else like that. But then again, Bonnie and Clyde probably eat them all. That's
Probably.
that's why
Yep.
they're 10, 12 pound of fish.
Hmm.
We did have
Yep.
another question from one of our members. What do you think about the Minneapolis Cedar Lake problem with the poisonous algae?
Cedar Lake with the poisonous algae. I have not heard about that.
I had not either. I didn't know Cedar Lake had a problem with poisonous algae. Okay.
I'll maybe look into that a little bit. So it's probably a harmful algal bloom related to some kind of cyanobacteria. So
Somebody
blue-green algae.
blue-green, yeah, blue-green algae.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
All right.
Mhm.
I do know there's a lake down, I thought it was in the Chaska area, that apparently has been overrun with the goldfish. I saw an article in
Yes.
the St. Paul paper where they're trying to net them and tag them. And I guess I don't
Mhm.
understand, if it's overrun, why don't they, eradicate them rather than
Right.
tag them and put them back in the lake? I mean, it's like it's destroyed the ecosystem of that lake. I mean, what is the
Yes.
thinking behind the tagging them and releasing them back?
So the idea behind that is that one of the first questions that somebody asked, which is a great question, is about the life history of these different animals. Oftentimes we don't know what the life history is, where they go at certain periods of the year, what type of habitat they're occupying, and that sort of thing. So tagging has been used for years by fisheries management agencies, and the first time that I know of that there was an extensive tagging process was they were tagging the invasive carp, the big head and silver carp. And the reason why they began to do that is that we didn't know how fast they move from one location to another, and again, what kind of habitat they operate and at what time of the year. And if we can find some kind of, I guess, sort of chink in the armor of the life history, there might be a control opportunity. At the same time that's been going on, Dr. Peter Sorensen at the University of Minnesota's Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center has been tagging common carp, and that has been extremely useful to determine what sort of habitats these fish are utilizing. And what they found there is that they congregate in specific areas during the wintertime. And so that's where then physical control like netting can then be applied, or possibly some other kind of alternative control technique.
Okay.
So if we can tag these goldfish or these koi and find where they're going to, I think they're goldfish in the case of Chaska,
Correct.
can tag those and then find out what sort of habitat they're using and where they're going, and maybe use that to even more effectively control them.
Okay. All right.
Great questions.
Do we have any more questions from any of our members? Okay.
All
Well,
right. Well,
Doug, I
it's been
appreciate all your time you gave us today, and I thank you very much for your informative. I believe our members are looking at, between the Sea Grant program and the Habitude
mhm.
collaborative. I think we might have to get involved with you guys and see if we
That would
can't
be
promote
wonderful.
safe practices for the fish and for the plants.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and if there's an opportunity to partner through your plant sale by having a Habitatitude surrender event, we could explore that as well.
Okay. I will do that. All right.
Hmm.
All right. So that is done with the questions. All right. I am going to, by the way, we are recording this program. Minnesota Water Garden Society has a YouTube channel. And we are going to post this to our YouTube channel and also on our website, mwgs.org, I believe that's correct, so that any of our members who have not been able to attend today, they will be able to see this presentation also.
Terrific.
All right.
How many
Thank you, Doug.
members do you have? How many members do you have?
Okay, Jerry, we have over 400 members, and I
Wow.
believe it's like 270 households.
Wow.
Maybe Jerry can send me a chat real quick. see here. I got things in the way. All right. She hasn't answered me yet, but I know we're over 400 members.
Okay.
But it does it pretty much by the household. So anybody in the house, 245 households,
Wow.
or is that members, Jerry? Jerry just sent me 245, but it doesn't tell me if that's members or
Let's see that.
households.
Yeah. All right.
Okay,
Well,
households. Households. There we go. Households. So, and
Okay.
you know, it's at least double because most people have a significant other, or spouse, or
Well, sure.
whatever. So,
All right.
yeah.
Well, it's been awesome to be with you. Great questions. Hopefully everybody stays safe and stays healthy out there.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.